has a lot of different characters already established in the world, and in the current point in the lore, there are a lot of characters in the forefront all over the place with things that are being prepped and all of that with where I'm writing at the moment and those that have happened. Got everyone from the different leaders like the Roncier, King Arion of Tarasil, everything going on with Cavaltir, and everything going on elsewhere, like Cersei leading the Emerald Path tribe, and all the rest of these things. But what I wanted to specifically look at today is two characters who play much more of a significant but background role. And one of them could be deemed not really a master puppeteer, but someone who is a bit of a chess master behind the scenes and just moving things around the different areas, whilst the other pretty much goes out of her way to assist with other things that she deems viable, whilst also managing to maintain and tether together her own lands. And the first of these is King Larros of Talamarith. Larros is a character who will be getting a bit more focus, but at the time, in terms of right now, where we're at in the lore, he is an aged figure. He's been married, he's got his own children, and moved them across in terms of different political positions. But Talamarith is one of these human realms that is in a bit of a different situation for several reasons. One, out of the four destinal based human kingdoms, he is the only one that has both a mainland and an island that he has to maintain. Two, they are the coastal wardens of the East, pretty much, against threats, most notably the Dark Elves, but occasionally other things as well. And they are also the closest tether that the human kingdoms directly have to places like Arasind, although at this point that is a bit less, obviously, because of the A-gate barrier, but it can still see some limited trade. But the biggest thing for Larros in the terms of where we're at in the lore is the moves he makes, especially when it comes to things like the Cavaltir Civil War. At the point of the breakout of this conflict, Larros is watching everything. He knows that the Dracons are currently without a leader because Trelvin has vanished. They know that Throncier's Wood Elves are present to the north but have a large focus on things towards the Twin Isles in the south, which he's not fully involved in but is limited to where because he can see the ships going past. They travel through the sea lane. But there are other elements as well. His southern border is now becoming incredibly unsteady because Cavaltir is fracturing in several different pieces. He knows that Rovlaror has fallen under rebellion as well, which puts Tarasil itself under a difficult position, as well as Tarasil also having other tethers to things going on in other locations as well, which has split their focus. So Larros has to play it a bit clever. He doesn't do what Arion does in the sense of Arion is caught in the middle of a lot of these things, being Tarasil, which is the central kingdom. So he tends to lock down his borders more instead of directly involving in case he accidentally stirs something that he can't control. But what Larros does is much more direct for several reasons, and it is a little bit of an opportunistic element. He does not trust these rebels that have formed out of Larros, and he feels that he's one of the ones who quickly picks up on the idea of, whilst he's not fully certain how it links, he feels that the uproar of this rebellion and the assassination of Vernir in Cavoltir have happened very quickly, and he starts to think that it might be orchestrated by an actual greater threat, which isn't actually true. It's not, but he, especially with the presence that he quickly learns of Dark Elf mercenaries present in Rovlaror alongside the rebels, and that creates a mass amount of uncertainty for him in terms of, are they orchestrating? Because again, this has happened, yes, several years after, but it gets lured into a bit of an awkward suspicion, because I know I haven't gone into Galakaros lore yet, but the crisis Galakaros doesn't happen like that long before this. It's several years, but it's not like 70 or 80 years. It's much quicker than that. And it was an assault from Zenetvia's forces on Galakaros on the entire world, to the point where it nearly flat out wiped out the ogres of Sarakarth and the trolls of Talonsur. It drove the forest dwarfs Ijati and the Dark Elves into a final defense on Shar. So at that point, and it also cost the Dark Elves their leader at the time, Zakarth. But with that being the case, Larros finds it quite surprising to see any form of Dark Elven presence, understanding how crippled just everyone outside of pretty much Destinal and Arasin were. Well, I say that on Archivorous was as well, but that's a different story because that's cut off. But he reacts to this quite quickly, understanding that he can't commit his own troops there because A, trying to muster them that quickly would take time. It would also lessen the garrison when there's a civil war literally to his south. And also, again, having to guard the Isle and things like that. So he brings in the Narkerlin mercenary group, aka some of the former Aphalas Shadow Dance heroes, in this case the mercenary group led by Guzia, Sovereign, Smugorn, and one other whose name's escaping me right now. But he calls upon them to go and assist, but he plays it in a specific way, because this mercenary group, the contingent of forces from Arasin and the steppes and everything, had come down and ended up getting into quite a sizable tavern brawl and causing other problems on the actual Isle of Tartak for Larros, and in doing so, he gave them a choice, like pay for the recompense or help rebuild or things, or do something like this. Because whilst there's different leaders here that are much more sort of internally focused or minded with this, like what's going on with the rebels and things like that, Larros is not one of them. Larros is someone who is a much more big picture thinker, and given the fact that he is related to, he shares the same bloodline as someone like Becca Quinn, the Lone Seer, the one who has visions that she orchestrates into paintings of potential futures. He has a bloodline of effectively big picture thinkers, and he knows that an unstable Rovlaror could cause major issues, so he commits the mercenary group, giving them the choice to go there and aid the loyalists and against the rebels to try and curb them, but particularly to try and take on the Dark Elves and hold them back. But whilst this is also the case, he also finds a messenger to track down Olacron and Fori. Well, I say Olacron and Fori. It might just be Fori at this point. Olacron might already be gone, but to try and track down the old Wood Elf assassin, so that she can go and meet with the Dark Elves, in this case Zelqyn, to question her on what on earth is going on, because there was an agreement after Galakaros between pretty much all forces that, or the majority, there was some like the Forest Dwarfs and the Dark Elves that never really sought the agreement, neither the Ajati or the Dark Elves, but the Dark Elves did put on this idea of we need a time of recovery and things like that. So he goes there to, or he sends Fori and his own contingent to try and question what is going on. But whilst he awaits for that and has sent the group off, Larros doesn't actually stop there. And at this point, it's also worthwhile to note that Larros has been involved in several things in the lore. He was somewhat part of the Years of Sorrow. He was involved in part sending forces to aid against Galakaros. He was directly involved in the battles of Tonroof's conquest, but specifically more on the eastern side, clashing with the Dark Elves over the island and his own territory. But he also commits some other key acts with all of this. One of the big ones is that he gives Cordelia Thess safe passage through his territory so that she can travel across the Emerald River to the north to reach her husband in Cathimril at the north of the Kingdom of Tarasil. And they do that because there was pretty much no way that Cordelia was going to be able to safely pass through the Tarasil Cafaltir border at this point, because it's not just the case that Cafaltir was in a mess between Cordelia's nephew and her brother, but at the exact same time, Bauanoth, which lies right on the border between Tarasil and Cafaltir, had a lot of eyes on it as it was, because the person who assassinated Vernir was a part of the noble family of Bauanoth. And with that being the case, it is somewhere that was very I can't remember the word, ostracized, kind of. That might not be the right word, but it was left out there on its own whilst the forces of Kalern II, or Kalern II, and Hauron ended up clashing in the main place. Cordelia had remained in her family's actual home of Larath for a while, but then did flee, and Larros gave her safe passage, all the while also reaching out and contacting Hauron, not to actually offer Hauron particular protection, as that would be too obvious of an issue, but to pass the protection onto his child and to allow their child to flee and go into hiding within Talamarith. And in doing so, because whilst I haven't gone into full detail of the actual breakout of the Cafaltir Civil War or the battles or things, Hauron does lose. And whether he ends up dying or is exiled, haven't quite decided yet, but yes, his child is taken away, so it's one less thing for him to be fearful of, and Larros allows him to keep that sanctity because at this point, Larros also probably has a good deal of the foresight to understand that this would be the potential end or a dynamic shift for Cavoltaire, and trying to challenge it would just split the human forces too much, but he refused to see an innocent child be, well, fall victim either. So, because whilst Hauron's child does technically have a right to the throne of Cavoltaire, Hauron is the youngest of the original four siblings. And again, not many of the human factions in Aphalas go with the traditional male line. It's usually the firstborn. There's not really much cases of any of them sticking to it. They're sticking to other elements. It is the case in a couple of other spots, but not with them. And yeah, so Larros makes that move as well to secure that safety. He also forms an unspoken alliance with Arion again through a marriage basis. So he doesn't directly act in terms of sending forces, but what he does is make a lot of more diplomatic moves to try and just aid from behind the scenes, because the other one that is much more internal to Talamarith, which he does, is that he turns around and gifts away the sort of, well, doesn't gift away, but he increases the independence of the island territories. He knows about what threats they've faced recently. He knows those threats may yet return in some form or another, or there might be other risks. And he also learned from Tonreef's conquest that the island territories are vulnerable, and it did require gathering more support for him to be able to retake them. And also, the Dark Elves ending up having to slightly empty and go back east. And with that being the case, he splits the territory so that he himself can. Because the other thing he is aware of is that he is aging. He is the oldest of all the human destinal leaders now, and he knows he's not going to be around forever, so he splits the focus and dedicates figures that are close to him, including his own family, some of them to focus on preserving the island territories, whilst others focus on preserving the mainland, and he puts his final efforts in ensuring those links and also on the mainland as well as other diplomacy. And yes, he is a warrior, he is a fighter, but he's one who, at this point, which is known as a real sort of behind the scenes cloak and dagger, more political maneuvering style, it's something that he does quite well, more than a lot of the other figures tend to do. And he is also, and this is one other notable thing, he gets into contact with the Temple Guard, and he is one of the few who actually tries to get word directly to Galeria. Because at this point, after Gallicaros and everything, Galeria is a lot weaker because of what happened. She can no longer take her more bestial form, she has to stick to the humanoid form. And she's dwelling somewhere, and he sends messages to the Temple Guard to query whether that's where she is, basically. If she's sat there watching all of this, on watching one of her creations pretty much or two of the kingdoms of her own creation effectively tearing themselves apart, and whether or what can they do, pretty much for a bit of guidance more than anything else. But he is one of the few to actually try and do this, and he still maintains communications with the Wood Elves to the best of his ability, and the Dragons, although, again, with Trelvin missing, that's further afield. So, at this point, his main sort of three sources of contact in terms of connections and allies are the Ijati, which they've always had a link to because the Coastline Alliance kind of, the Wood Elves to his north, and Arion and Tarasil. So, yes, that was Larros. An interesting little background figure, a veteran leader. In many ways, a kind of like a leader you'd expect to do the sort of things he's doing, but he does have the internal mindset of he's trying to do this to help the world, but not at the expense of his own people. So, which is why he commits like the mercenary group and all of these different things instead. But moving on to the other one, and we did actually mention her earlier, and it's one of the, honestly, the first named characters in the lore that we're focused on for the Dark Elves. There are several named Dark Elf characters already, it's just this is one of the first ones to have a segment in a video about her, and that is Zelqyn. Now, the thing about Zelqyn, more than anything else, is that she was the unexpected leader of the Dark Elves, and one that not all the Dark Elves agreed with. Zakarth Farir was her father, and she is Zelqyn Farir. Zakarth fell during the Crisis of Galakaros. He fought hard, he was joined with it for a long while, he was involved in multiple different things in terms of the Galakaros effort, including the attempted assassination of Senetvia, although that was in a more supporting role. But he ended up falling in the third siege of Rake, the Dark Elf capital. He desperately tried to rush back to aid in the city's defense and fell. He was killed in the fighting in the streets. And his son had also already fallen. What happened to his son, to the point where the son is not named, is that he was the heir, and he was in refuge. And because of what happened with Galakaros and everything, there was gatherings and all sorts. His son ended up in refuge in the forests, partly in Adalar and then further into the Forest Dwarf homes. And it is one of the rare cases, very, very rare, where the Dark Elves and Forest Dwarfs were actually working together in the forest and not trying to ambush each other. But the agents of Senetvia, one in particular, an ogre traitor actually, and his little band didn't force in, they moved in under false pretenses as supposedly a part of the force. And when they entered into the forests and that, they found the combined Forest Dwarf Dark Elf encampment by the settlements and things. And their objective in there was to kill the last actually loyal, because at this point the Sarakarth royal family was absolutely in tatters. One of them had fallen in, gotta remember if it was Amatroth or Kabalharth, but he duelled against Narakash, the fallen obsidian ogre that was with Senetvia. But he had already gotten one of his other relatives out, and I need to retrace the ogre family tree, and I'll have it up on the screen whether it's brother or son. But no, it was son, because what happens is the three sons, one of them betrays, one of them stupidly tries to go and assassinate Cenevia and ends up basically getting eaten by a giant wolf. That being Cenevia in her bestial form. And then the other one is the youngest of all of these and is still alive in the lore. This attempt fails, but yes, this fallen son's attempt to pretty much assassinate his brother, his younger brother, but the assassins miss their target, and in the chaos, in a quick act where Cenevia had sent them to try and assassinate the ogre leader, Zelqyn was also there, the king. No, he wasn't. Zelqyn falls at Gallicaros, the Alderman Lazan of the Forest Dwarfs. Zakarth was there and all sorts. The one who ends up falling is Zakarth's son. So the Dark Elves, in this botched assassination attempt on the ogres, the Dark Elves end up losing their heir. And then Zakarth goes on and falls at Rake later on, which suddenly throws Zelqyn into an unexpected leadership role. Now, I say unexpected, it's unexpected in the sense of she did not anticipate it happening like this or so quickly, but Zakarth had already prepared her as well in terms of nobility and leadership, because yes, I say that the son was in refuge and that's also because Rake had already been attacked. It had already been assaulted by Gallicaros, and Zakarth feared this, so he sent his son into hiding. His son is still older than Zelqyn, but still. And at this point, in this aftermath, Zelqyn does something that not a lot of the Dark Elf leaders would have done. Her father probably would have, but many others wouldn't have, and that is find common ground with some of the other peoples and try to bring in these sort of shaky kind of alliances. And they are shaky, let's be fair about that, but she tries to do this, and whilst externally it's going okay, internally it's an absolute mess for her. She is dealing with uproar and issues from different groups. You have that group that's split off and become this sort of mercenary group. Well, kind of mercenary on paper. In reality, they want to go over to Revloror to try and still show that they are the servants of Nagrasak. They are warriors of him. They serve him. They are sworn to him. Because they don't believe that Zelqyn is. Many of them, it's almost like you've got the more conservative kind of ones, and then you've got the more radical ones. The radical ones look at Zelqyn making these agreements and believe that she is turning against the person that they swore allegiance and fealty to centuries ago. Whereas the others actually are aware that she's trying to do this because she does still serve them. They are still sworn to Nagrasak, but they can't serve Nagrasak if they're in a mess. So they need to get their own things in order first. And it ends up with a lot of different disdain and distrust going on. There's Dark Elf riders that end up going back and forth to the Pyramid of the Deceased, which raises the suspicion of the Forest Dwarfs and their Desert Watchers in Daralathir. The Ajati keep a constant watch on them, as they always tend to. The other groups like Fori and Olacron pass through there beforehand as well. Or they pass through the Dark Elf territory beforehand and end up encountering Zelqyn. Whether that happens once Zelqyn is the leader or if it happens beforehand, probably because of lore timelines it happens beforehand and is in an encounter, and you could question why a troll and a wood elf would be able to traverse that territory, but when you realise that the wood elf is a veteran assassin and the troll at this point is probably one of the most powerful magic users in terms of enchanters on the world, um, it becomes a little bit different. But the whole element with Zelqyn is that she's a dark elf who she plays a key background role, but it's also quite symbolic as her efforts are ultimately and kind of sadly doomed to fail. Or even if she manages to do them, they won't last beyond her effort of trying to maintain these pieces and the recovery. And the thing is that while she maybe hopes that she's wrong, deep down she knows that. She knows that what she's trying to do will not last beyond her, but her priority right now is to just try and rebuild her people. Because whilst the ogres and the trolls were the closest to being completely torn apart by Gallicaros, the ogres in the case of Sarakarth, we saw a whole people of the goblins, in case of the Haraketh goblins, get completely destroyed by them. And the other element to all of it is the Dark Elves, whilst their people survived and did endure, their royal family almost got completely wiped out. And that would have completely destabilized. And whilst forces like the Forest Dwarfs and the Ajati look in on them with distrust because they are the Dark Elves, they are this big foe, the foe that they were chiefly responsible for keeping in check, Zelqyn looks at both of those forces in a kind of similar light. She has a bit more sympathy towards the Forest Dwarfs because they helped and they did willingly aid in the refuge of her brother and did aid in different things. The Ajati, the Dark Elves and the Ajati hate each other. Like it's a very begrudging kind of alliance and one that is very much just on paper. The one wrong move by either side and they will fight it out again. Because the Ajati have raided and assaulted the Dark Elves all over the place. Nagrasek has tasked the Dark Elves primarily with dealing with the Ajati, and in doing so, the Dark Elves have things like the actual specific Ajati hunters, which physically go after groups of the winged peoples, and when they succeed, those hunters decorate their weapons or their armor in the feathers of the fallen Ajati. So it's this whole thing. And Zelqyn isn't as politically sound as Larros, although I say that again, it's different circumstances. Larros and Talamarith are this noble, very loyal human kingdom, whereas Zelqyn is the leader of the Dark Elves, the first people who ever swore allegiance to Nagrasak willingly. So the circumstances are different. So you could maybe say that Larros's chess moves to maintain and support the world around him, and Zelqyn's efforts of trying to maintain a peace when her own people are so absolutely distrusted and despised is arguably maybe the larger effort of the two. And she does end up being able to stabilize the internal elements for the most part. She ends up marrying with one of the nobles of I think it's Ralathpar, and they're able to secure and handle some more outspoken individuals within their own ranks, but she isn't able to act quick enough to prevent that mercenary group from splitting off, the quote unquote mercenary group. So she still ends up having to face some consequences to that and has to prepare herself. Now, there isn't too much lore that has been written into Zelqyn's fate or story, but all I'm saying is, as the person who's crafting the lore in that, if she does manage to get around and survive all of this, that is very fortunate. And I'm not saying that she's going to, but she, again, it is one of these cases of a doomed effort, more or less. But while she is a doomed effort in trying to maintain these pieces, she is also the only one who's pretty much keeping Steotha and the Dark Elves from completely fracturing. Yes, they are an evil people. Yes, they are all these things, but they are still a civilization. They still operate in similar ways, farms and all the rest of it. So, yeah. But Larros and Zelqyn were the two who I wanted to look at on this video. A little bit all over the place because their stories are not done yet, but it was just capping over some of the more background roles because I know a lot of the focus at the moment on the lore has been on, well, Rhaenith, first of all. Rhaenith? I can't even. Rawne. Getting a place and a name muddled up. Place and a character muddled up. But they have all of that, and you've got the Shadow Dance characters who have been doing focuses on and mentions of ones like Throncia and Trelwyn. So I wanted to give a little emphasis on a couple of the others who are involved but are in the background a lot more at this moment in time. But that is where I am going to leave it for today. So I hope you all
The Dyspraxia magazine have offered up the opportunity for members of the community like myself to become affiliates. And the first element that I want to cover
and the
is their awareness cards, specifically because they have an awesome variety for dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, diabetes, and I believe a couple of others, alongside their other amazing products, and the issues of their magazine. These awareness cards are small, about the size of a bank card, but they help so much. They are a quick grab thing that you can keep with you if you are affected by one of these things. So if you are interested and you would like to have a little look at their store, pick something else up, or pick up one of the awareness cards, there is an affiliate link down in the description, and hopefully it helps bring some advice or support, or even just looking through it and learning something that you may not have known about one of these different conditions. And now back to the regular content.